for the fantasy football season. And here's a few tight ends I look to add on the wire this week. The first guy, Tyler Conklin of the New York Jets. Tyler Conklin, he's had double-digit fantasy points 3 games of the season so far here. Week 1 versus Baltimore, 4 catches, 16 yards, a touchdown. Week 2 at Cleveland, 6 catches, 40 yards. And Week 3 versus the Bengals, catches 84 yards. So Week 4 here at the Pittsburgh Steelers, a decent matchup here for Tyler Conklin. But the only thing here is Joe Flacco is not going to be the quarterback anymore for this Jet team. Zach Wilson, who they drafted last season, is going to come back in Week 4. And we'll see if that breaks up the rapport. But Tyler Conklin, he's putting up numbers. He's a big target. And even last season, we saw him as a good option from time to time when he was on the Minnesota Vikings. So right now, available is Conklin in over 75% of fantasy leagues here. And he's a guy that fantasy owners can't ignore anymore. And they should get off their waiver wire because tight end's a pretty weak position. But Conklin, he's had 3 good games, especially in PPR leagues this season so far. And he's a guy to get, even though Zach Wilson coming back could hurt his value. Believe it or not, the next guy, Robert Tonyan of the Green Bay Packers. So this Packer offense, they're starting to look like they're rounding into form, even though I know they only scored 14 points. Aaron Rodgers, he was hitting all types of guys in this game, spreading the football out. And Robert Tonyan, we know he's coming off the knee injury, but this was his best game to date so far. Week 1 in Minnesota, 3 catches, 36 yards. Week 2 versus the Bears, 2 catches, 11 yards. And Week 3 at Tampa, 6 catches, 37 yards on 7 targets. Tonyan, I'm not going to rush out there to the waiver wire, but we know tight end's a weak position. We know you always got to find guys out there at the position as well. And he's on an offense with obviously Aaron Rodgers, who I still think is one of the better quarterbacks in the league. Even though he's not putting up the numbers, he's still one of the smartest. He still could get the ball to his guys in big situations. And right now, Tonyan's available in 70% of fantasy leagues. And worth an ad this week. The next guy's David Njoku of the Cleveland Browns. And Njoku, he had a big game, but he's a guy I just can't buy into. You see this a lot from him. One big game, and then he disappears for 2 or 3 ball games once again. But Njoku, he was a main target of Jacoby Brissett, and he had one of the best games of his career in Week 3 versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Week 1 at Carolina, he didn't do anything. 1 catch, 7 yards. Week 2 versus the Jets, didn't do anything as well. 3 catches, 32 yards. But Week 3 versus Pittsburgh, 9 catches, 89 yards, and a touchdown. He's got a pretty good matchup in Week 4 in an indoor game at the Atlanta Falcons. So right now, available in about 50% of fantasy leagues here is David Njoku. He's a guy that definitely you got to highlight. He had the big game, no doubt about it. But he's also a guy I'm not going to hold my breath and expect him to break out and put up big numbers. He's just an inconsistent tight end, and that's what a lot of these players are at this position. So right now, if you want to go out there and get Njoku, that's fine. But he's a guy I'm not that high on, even though he's coming off the big game. We've seen this a lot from him. And then he disappears for weeks on end. The next tight end's Will Disley of the Seattle Seahawks. So right here, Geno Smith, he's building a rapport with Will Disley, especially in the red zone. And so far this season, he's been pretty decent in 2 out of the first 3 ball games. Week 1 versus Denver, 3 catches, 43 yards, a touchdown. Week 2 at San Francisco, 2 catches in that one. And Week 3 versus the Falcons, 3 catches, 34 yards, and a touchdown. So Week 4, pretty decent matchup for Disley and the Seattle Seahawks team at the Detroit Lions. And Disley available in 99% of fantasy leagues. I know he's a guy that could be inconsistent, and I know they got a lot of tight ends over there in Seattle, especially Noah Fant, who they got in the Russell Wilson deal as well. But right here, Geno Smith likes hitting the tight ends, and him and Disley have a good rapport. So right now, it's a guy not to ignore, especially with 2 touchdowns in the first 3 games. I definitely would give Disley consideration this week in the 5th and final tight end I look to get on the wire this week. So rookie and a guy not many people know about, Delaney Woods of the Indianapolis Colts. So he's available universal in 100% of fantasy leagues. So right here, Woods, it was his first big game of his career here, and his only game that he's even shown up on the box score. Week 1 at Houston and Week 2 at Jacksonville, no targets and didn't play. But Week 3 versus Kansas City, 3 targets, 2 catches, 13 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I don't think this guy, he's going to be much of a fantasy option, but he's definitely a guy to highlight coming off a 2-touchdown game. Maybe they're going to have him active instead of Mo Alley Cox in the next few weeks here. And he's a guy that made big plays in this ball game to have the Colts get the victory versus the Kansas City Chiefs in a big Week 3 shocker. So right now, the Colts, they got a decent matchup versus division rival Tennessee Titans here in Week 4. Even though we know Darren Waller didn't do much in that ball game. Delaney Woods, he's a guy in deepest of leagues I would look to get on my fantasy team, but a guy to talk about coming off a 2-touchdown game, so that's a few tight ends I look to hit on the wire here for week 4 of the fantasy football season.